Hey guys, so it's just about noon. We got about 10 minutes, and as promised, we're going to be working through some of the day one Modern Calligraphy Summit worksheets and practices. But before we get started, and since this is day one and it is our beginning calligraphy, I wanted to actually start out with a little bit of the prep work that goes into calligraphy before you ever actually get started. So again, since it's day one, I'm going to show you some of the supplies I have out that are going to get me through the next 2 weeks. So we'll take a little bit different of an office tour today and look at some supplies, where I get them, what they're for, etc., etc., because you guys are going to see these coming up throughout the next 2 weeks. So let me turn you around here. Okay, so here we go. So here's my desk today. I have a ton of stuff. Way too much on my desk right now, more than I normally do, but let me walk you through some of these things, and then we're going to get started with how to prep some of your calligraphy supplies and how to get started. So I pulled a couple of these boxes out of my closet here. Let me block the light, it's so bright behind you. So I've got my watercolors, I've got 2 boxes of pens, I've got my chart packs. The box that is labeled colors is actually mostly colored pencils. And I just picked up these guys, just some fun little Crayola markers and some fun colors for some lettering that we're going to do later on this week. I've got my paintbrushes and some pens, and then of course my regular roundup of desk supplies, including, you know, my Dior lipstick and the photo emulsion remover for all the screens that I got to clean this week that I haven't done yet. So let's go through some of these. So I have a whole box of watercolors. You guys have asked several times what type of watercolors I use when I'm working on big pieces like that, which doesn't look like anything yet, but it will tomorrow, hopefully. So I have a couple different things in here. This is kind of my box of like the cheap watercolors. If I'm doing a big project, I know I'm going to be going through a lot of paint, I'll throw in some of this stuff. Not my favorite, but when you say I want watercolor supplies for Christmas, sometimes you get what you get. So that's where that came from. In here I've got some old, I've got some new, I have tons of different brands. Everyone asks me what brand I use. I actually don't use a specific brand. I go according to what color I'm using, and a lot of watercolors will be different prices based on what they're actually made of. Some of the blues are made with some more expensive product, and some of the reds are as well, but most, like the Rose Madder is an inexpensive one, which is one of my favorites. I do have some gouache. These are two random ones. I don't know what possessed me to buy this. It happens. Buyer's remorse. Here's a gouache as well. So I have them all kind of mixed in here. That's a white. Gotta have white sometimes. So this is my watercolor, and then what I do is I take that onto my palette. So around the edge of my palette, I have little bits of all the different colors that I use. These are all filled right now. Sometimes if there's a color I'm really not using, like I very rarely use this blue, it's kind of a cerulean, I don't like it. I'll pop it out with a putty knife and put something in there that I actually am going to use, and that will probably happen this week. I'm kind of tired of that color. That's what happened here. I popped out some blue and added in some gold, and obviously I didn't get quite all the blue out of there, and apparently that was wet. Whoops. Alright, so I got gold in my hand. I have 2 boxes of pens on my desk right now. These are all the pens and markers that don't really fit anywhere else in my supplies, but I hang on to them because occasionally I use them. I've got anything and everything from Sharpies. I've got some of these guys in here. Oh, they're so dreamy and pretty. Just some regular markers, tons of pens, colored pencils, a lot. I've got chalk markers in here, paint pens. I don't even know what that is. What is that? Brilliant acrylic paint pen. Did not know I had that. I've got some metallics. These are from a project that I wrote on ribbon. This guy in particular. I've got about 5 of these rolling around. So I'm sure I'll bust those out later this week when we're working in some of the brush lettering with markers and pens. Let's see what else I've got here. I have my Add chart pack markers. These are replaced basically replaced by the Prismacolor ones, because these I think smell amazing, but they smell like a combination of gasoline and spray paint. I really like it. Yeah, I like the colorless ones too. They've got a really great blending option in here. It usually looks like this guy. It looks black, but it's not. I use these a lot. They're fun to play with. They've got a really cool kind of bleed effect to them. They definitely have their place. Yeah, I love that smell. Like, I love the smell of gasoline too. It's kind of weird. Here's crayons, colored pencils. Just, I pulled them out in case I need them this week. So that's kind of my stuff that I have out for this week. Some of the supplies I'll be using. So I've pulled a lot of my calligraphy supplies over here, just some of the basic ones that I'm going to be using today. But I'm going to walk you guys through the basics of what the different tools are, how to use them a little bit, how to prep them, the different types of nibs I'm going to be using, the type of ink I use. Got my nifty little pad of paper here, so we're going to go through some of that. There we go. Okay, so I'm not sure the best way of going about this and having where to have my camera so that you guys can see what I'm doing, but I can also talk to you and respond to any questions that you have directly. This is on a tripod, so I'm sorry if I bump it. Ooh, it's gonna shake really bad. Okay, so before I get too into it, today we're talking about calligraphy. Calligraphy is that really old style of handwriting. It is a dead art. It's a dying art that we're bringing back with a vengeance. We're trying to, and the Modern Calligraphy Summit is a really great way of showcasing our work, teaching new artists, and encouraging people who want to make this either a career or just a really awesome hobby to have. Excuse me, got a hair in my mouth. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need when it comes to calligraphy is obviously going to be a calligraphy pen. When most people think of calligraphy, this is not what they think of. I don't think I have any of my other nibs here with me. I don't. They're in a different box from my last class that have that flat top on them. That's what most people think of when they think of a calligraphy nib. It's for bookhand, which we don't do. We're not doing Modern Calligraphy Summit. Bookhand style is a little bit blockier. It's not my favorite. I did learn it last semester. I took a class in it. I don't really like it. I don't like it at all. It's a little bit dated to me. Gothic is another one that's used as that same style of pen. Gothic I like a little bit more, but I think the pointed pen calligraphy, what we do, what you see my work, is a lot more applicable to what styles and trends we have going on today and what's going to be sustainable as a hobby and a career. So we do pointed pen. This is one of my nibs. Yeah, it's just not, it's not that fun. It's not very exciting. Like, you don't get enough, to me, I don't get enough flourishes and creative personality in the blockhand. If there's a Gothic class coming up, I'll probably take it because Gothic's a little bit more exciting, but the bookhand was just, it was really boring. I didn't like it. Okay, so I've got a few different things here. First thing you're gonna need is a holder. So I have a whole handful. Holders come in two different styles. They come in a straight and they come in an oblique. I take my classes through the Mainline Night School here in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. We've got a really great teacher. Her name is Deborah Kaplan, who teaches their 8 to 10 week courses. So they're pretty intensive, and she does some really great homework assignments. And the homework assignments she gives is actually why I started painting for myself, because her classes forced me to start doing it. I realized how much I loved it. Which is my favorite nib or my favorite class? Does that mean oblique? Which holder? Which class is my favorite? I've taken a few from her. I think copperplate will be my favorite, which is what's coming up now. However, my favorite holder, I have two. I have this one and this one that I love the most. This one, because I nerd out hardcore. It looks like a wand. I think it's really awesome. However, because of my super covered in paint, here, that one's a little bit cleaner. Because of these ridges here, it's actually not very comfortable to hold for a long period of time. If I'm doing an order in this and it'll start hurting my hand, I'll wrap this bottom part in yarn to give it a little bit of a cushion. So I'll typically go with something like this that's going to be a little bit more comfortable to write for a longer period of time. These two match. They're really cute. These are from John Neal Book Supply. They still carry them. Laura Hooper has this one as well. You'll see it on some of her Instagram pictures. The other one is an oblique. This oblique, this is where the nib goes right here. This is really great. I have found for Spencerian. It does put your hand at a slightly different angle. It's a little bit easier to get those nice, clean, squared off ends, if you know anything about Spencerian. We're not going to get too far into that today. With this angle, I did not learn on an oblique, I learned on a straight holder. And when I first started learning, the bottles of ink I had a smaller top on them. This is not ink. Smaller than this, and I couldn't fit the oblique holder into the ink well. So I steered away from these because it was enough of a barrier for me to begin any project or any practice that I wouldn't do it, because I didn't really know the best way of going about circumventing the holder not fitting in the ink well. I mean, now I know there's lots of different things you can do, but back then I didn't. So I learned on a straight. So I prefer straight unless I'm doing a Spencerian. So much of what you guys will learn in calligraphy is personal preference. You'll ask, what's your favorite nib? What's your favorite ink? It's personal preference. We all have our favorite, but a lot of it is personal preference. So speaking of favorites, my favorite is this guy. As a very, I really wish this would focus better. Hello? No look. Okay, well, this is my favorite. It's got a cutout on the front that is pretty distinctive. It's a 101. There's a few different makers of this. Put your hand behind it. Oh, is that why people do that? Is it working? Okay, well, it's better than nothing. There's a few different makers of this. My favorite is the Speedball or Hunt. It's the super basic nib. This is the first nib I ever picked up, so it's the one I learned on. It is my favorite. When I first started doing calligraphy, I didn't even know there were different nibs. So I stuck with this one for years, and it has suited me very well. It is about a medium strength, bounce. I don't know what the actual terminology is. When you press on it, it's got about a medium resistance level where it's not super flexible, but it's also not super hard. Some of the ones like the Nico G, the Zebra, flexibility, I guess. I'm sure there's an official term for it. I should probably know that. The Nico and the Zebra, I'm sorry you guys, my allergies are terrible today. The Nico and the Zebra are a little bit stiff for me. It hurts my hand after a while. I can do, I could do 75 envelopes with this guy without it hurting my hand, but the Zebra and the Nico, I can do about 25 before my hand starts to hurt a little bit. So I'm naturally going to go with one that doesn't hurt my hand as much. The Nico and the Zebra, they look very similar. This is the Zebra, this is the Nico. Does that actually work? So they look very similar. One of them comes in gold as well. I got one of those because I thought it was pretty. This one. It's a Zebra. Zebra comes in gold as well. I haven't used this guy yet, actually. It's brand new still. These ones are, to me, I think are really good if I'm doing a difficult job on either bad paper or it could be really good paper. Some high quality cotton-based papers are terrible to write on, and these stiffer nibs are a little bit easier to use. If you have a textured paper, a linen, these are going to be a little bit better. They're not quite as sharp because they're a stiffer flexibility. They don't catch as easily either. There are some other nibs out there that I don't think anybody's going to be using at the summit. Pull some of these guys out. Oh, there's the other one. There's some little baby guys. A good girlfriend of mine is a huge advocate for these little guys. It's what she learned on. So it's what she knows and what she's familiar with. These are Jenny's from Graceline Art. If you guys follow her on Instagram, she's wonderful. But she uses these little guys. It's personal preference. So I will use these little ones when I'm doing small lettering. It's a lot easier for me to get a smaller size, especially for the lowercase, if I have a smaller nib that I'm working with. Whoops, sorry. So that's a little bit about nibs. I do have a brand spanking new nib. This guy is brand new. This is my 101 that I love. If I were to dip this right into the ink kind of just falls off of it. It doesn't stay on the nib. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on. There are ways to clean your nibs. They come with a coating on them. Some people run them over a flame. I think that's kind of unnecessary. Will just say lazy. I'm lazy. I like to cut out as many steps as possible. So for me to hunt around, look for a flame of some sort, it's not going to happen. You can wash them, you can wipe them with Somebody said they use Windex. I do this. It's really gross. I'm so sorry. And I wipe it off. You can stick it in your mouth and suck on it. Lots of people do it. But I have found that a lot of calligraphers do it this way, but they don't like admitting it. So they'll say they do something else. When you admit that you spit on your nibs, they're like, yeah, I totally do that too. So I clean it off with a little spit on my fingers. I know. It's kind of embarrassing. The other thing I like to do is I prep mine with gum arabic. This is not a necessary step, but I have found, especially as my nibs get older and a little bit more worn, this helps the ink flow nicely. So I'll take a little bit of the gum arabic and kind of just wipe it on my nib. I don't want a ton of it on there. It literally is 1/8 of a drop that I just put on here and wiped around. I don't want enough that it pools or it falls off, just a tiny bit to coat it. I feel like it helps the ink flow really nicely. So ink-wise is our next step. Right now mine is in a jar. This is how you get around tiny jars with tiny holes in the top where you can't get your nib in there. You use a bigger jar. I decant out of my big giant ink thing. How often do I wipe them off, or how often do I fill up my ink? How often do I gum arabic them maybe? When I notice that the ink isn't flowing well, I'll do that as a preventative measure so I don't ruin my nib. Or if it's just a nib that's been pretty tried and true and it's getting a little gross, like this guy's really gross, guys. This one's really gross. But it's a great nib because it's super stiff. I can write on all sorts of stuff, but it's hammered. It looks like it got left in water at some point, which it probably did. So I can throw a little bit of gum arabic on there and it'll kind of revive it up a little bit. Ink-wise, let me grab my ink. And you're welcome. And I'm going to take my sweater off. I turned my location off. If you guys were here this morning, we had some nasty little trolls on here that were, I mean, I guess I could just take it as a compliment. I'm in painting clothes today. A nib will last, depends on what you're doing. I can use a single nib for an entire envelope project of 100, 150, 200. It depends on how hard I'm pressing, how much pressure I'm using, and how long of a period of time that I'm actually using it. So if I have the same nib and the same holder that I've been using like a workhorse for 3 weeks straight, it's gonna go. But if I have one that I don't use very often that's sitting in my cup holder for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, it's fine. It depends on how much you actually use it. That is subjective. There's no real answer to that. And I have one that's a dead nib that I'll show you in a second. So here's my ink. I use Sumi ink. This little nifty top has a really good dispenser on it, so I'm not pouring. If anybody finds out how to take rust off your nib other than scrubbing it and putting some gum arabic, let me know, because I don't really know. I throw some gum arabic on there. Usually if they rust, they've been used down enough that I usually will just toss them. How do I know, how do you know when to change? Okay, that's what I was talking about, a dead nib. Okay. I prefer Sumi, personal preference. I have a bottle of Higgins as well. Let's see if we can see this. You can barely see it. There's a space. See the two tines when they separate when I push them? There's a space that is permanently there. You can kind of just barely see it. When your nib stops flowing well, that's actually not a bad idea. You can clean anything with Coke. Good idea. That's a good thinking. When your nib starts to separate, those two phalanges no longer close all the way. You'll get a little bit of an air space between them. That's going to prevent your ink from flowing. I know some of the vintage nibs you can actually sharpen. I've never tried it with the new stuff. I just don't trust them. You know, nib is $1. I'm just gonna toss it and put a new one in, so I know that my product is as good as it can be and my nib is not giving me issues. I would rather start over with a new nib that I know is going to be smooth, it's not going to catch on the paper, the ink's going to flow properly. I tried that. I tried just soaking it and it did not help at all. I guess I could use like CLR. CLR might work, toothpaste might work also. So that's how you tell if a nib is dead, when the ink stops flowing really well and you can wipe it off, look at it. If you see that little air space between the two flanges, the flanges aren't closing anymore. If this happens a lot, if you are finding this happen over and over and over again, because it happened to me when I first started, I had a pretty heavy hand. If you have a heavy hand and you're using a lot of pressure and you find yourself going through nibs a lot, there's a couple things you can do. One is lighten up your stroke, and two is to use a stiffer nib. If you have a really heavy hand, grab one of these guys like the Nico or the Zebra that is stiffer, has less flexibility to it. It's that flexibility when you're constantly pressing on the nibs and they're opening and opening and opening a little bit further past maybe what their prime pressure point is, then you're going to find yourself going through nibs a lot faster. Okay, so ink. I use Sumi. There's a bottle of Higgins up there. I also use walnut ink. I use gouache. I'll mix up my own gouache. We'll come to that later this week. A Winsor & Newton white is my favorite. I mix my own gold. I use tons of different ink for different projects based on what paper I'm using, what nib I'm using, what style of writing I'm doing, if it's for a client, if it's going to be scanned in. So if I'm scanning something in for a project like an invitation, yeah, it does have a nice finish to it, except that when you scan it in, sometimes that can not be helpful. Dawn OxyClean mixed with, or clean with a toothbrush, that would work. Clearly I have not even tried washing the rust off my pens. Goodness, this is actually, it's really easy to get distracted and forget where I am. Ink wise, if I'm scanning it in, I always do it in black. It scans the best. When you get it into Photoshop and you're messing with your levels, black is the easiest thing to work with. And then you can change your colors from there. If I'm doing it for a client and I'm mixing my own, I use gouache. And again, we'll get to that later because that's a whole different thing. If you're part of the Modern Calligraphy Summit and you saw the Christmas video of how to mix gold ink, it's basically the same thing. Okay, so how I do my ink. We're gonna do this. And at this point, it's gonna be a lot more difficult for me to see your guys' questions, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, so here's my desk. There we go. Okay, I'll reposition it when I actually start writing so you can see it well. How I do my ink on my desk is a little bit odd. I really prefer to have it so it has a deep well on one side. So I'll put it up on my eraser like that. So the eraser is obviously rubber, so the glass is not going to slip off of it, and it's not going to slip on my desk either because it's rubber. So you'll see me do this a lot, especially as my ink gets lower. My phone, here I'll show you. Is on its own little tripod, which is attached to my other tripod. You can see the big mess I made this morning. My poor floor. That's what my phone is on right now. It's a little jerry-rigged, but it's better than last week where it was on that tray thing and I knocked it off twice. That was really smooth. Here we go. Okay, so when we're working on beginning calligraphy, give me a second. I'm going to adjust this as much as I can so you guys can see what I'm writing. You can see Laura in the background here. She's doing her first class today. Laura Hooper. Just dawned on me that this is actually going to be backwards. Definitely not going to be able to see you guys. Okay, stay. No. I'm sorry, guys. I should have figured this out ahead of time. It's still moving. Give me a second. I am still figuring this stuff out, obviously. I apologize. There we go. Okay. Yeah, if I flip the camera around so I can actually see what you guys are saying, then all my writing is backwards, which is not exactly productive. I might have to take the case off my phone. Okay, I think we're good. For goodness sake. No. Okay, I'm gonna pause this and come back. Hang on. And now if